My name is Kathy White, and I am a consultant for CISA 2, and I am one of the co-chairs for the AT Forward project. I am an assistive technology specialist and have taught in the public schools for over 33 years, and I'm now on, year 37, I think, of doing assistive tech. So been doing this a while. And I am joined today by Dave Butler. You want to say hi, Dave?
Hello, everybody, and let me add my thanks as well for you taking time out of your day. I'm the National Account Director for Everway, which is a combination of Text Help and N2Y coming together, and those two companies are now functioning as a new company called Everway. I've been in the AT field for 25 years, starting the first 22 years at Don Johnston, so I've been along with PAR and UPAR since the inception. So I'm really excited to share that with you today.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Dave. Well, I wanted to kind of get us started by this quote, and it's one that Denise DeCoste, and we'll talk about her in a minute because she's the one who started all this. It really kind of grounded all of us in this. That she talks about without a diagnostic process, teachers are no better than chance at determining if a student needs reading accommodations. And we did actually put in the citation there for you because I think it's important for us as educators to be able to say, this is why we're doing it. It's research based. We're doing this for good reason. It's not that we just flipped a coin and said, yay, this is going to work, right? Because we don't know unless we have something to back it up. So keep that little quote in your back pocket. So we want you, as we're doing these things, we want you to think about maybe trialing UPAR or PAR when we're done with this. So we kind of want you to think about that. We do want you to think about something called Bookshare, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. If you don't know about that, please contact us because you have to, if we know that a student needs to read a lot of accommodation, how are we then providing them with the right tools and the right electronic accommodations, the AEM, accessible educational materials? How are we getting that to our students? And ways that you could make sure your students are getting those accommodations. Are you looking at our feature matches? Are you making sure that you've checked the right boxes in the IEP? How are you doing those things? So we just really want to make sure that you have these things to think about as we're working our way through. And if you have questions, concerns while we're doing this, Dave and I are pretty good about just on the fly, on the cuff. So please interrupt if you need something. If you look at the IEP, we just want to make sure that when you're doing this, a lot of people just go, does a student need assistive tech? They mark the box yes or no, and they move on. Well, in the state of Wisconsin, we're also looking at, does the student require assistive tech to access and use and derive meaning from grade level print? How are you doing that? So you have to be able to answer both of these questions to move us on, okay? So I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that. So what we're talking about today is Denise DeCoste, and Denise DeCoste she's retired, an occupational therapist, and she had an expertise in assistive technology. And she looks at both the reading process and the writing process. So, she's got both ends of that. And she developed this thing called Protocols for Accommodations in Reading. And it really was a process for us to look at that went, oh, yeah, this really does make sense to have this accommodation for a student. And it was a screening tool that really drilled down and gave us the right accommodations. It gave us the data to support our IEP decisions and made sure then we had the right accessible educational material in place for that student. So if you've never done this before, we've given you on the next page here, this link here, the protocol for accommodations and reading. This will send you now to, and I'm going to screw this up every time now, Dave, because it's new, to Everway. It's kind of like these dominoes have gone. So it was Don Johnston, then it was Text Help, and now it's Everway. So the name have changed. A few of the players have changed, but the content is all still there. And with this link, you're going to get a free download of the paper version of Protocols for Accommodations and Reading. And I'm going to go through what you can do with this paper tool because it is free. And then Dave is going to talk more about what you could do with this tool with all the computerized version of it. Okay. So what this is going to do is designed to assist you to figure out, yeah, is this read aloud going to work for my student or not going to work for my kid? Okay. So the other, I did want to, before I got too involved in this, I did want to make sure that, again, I was looking at the why behind this. There's some great research that comes right out of the PAR manual. Um, the first one in 1982, which I know was a while ago, but it determined that comprehension of content improved with the use of audio recordings. So, most of our students are sitting in classrooms, and what are we either doing? We're either reading to them, so we've got paraprofessional that's reading to them, okay, and depending upon that paraprofessional, it could be too fast, too slow, maybe the student still can't follow along. There's lots of other issues that are going on underneath. It's not just being read to. If you've ever sat down with an audio book, my speed's definitely going to be different than Dave's speeds and Stacy's speeds. It's just all different. So this will allow us to get to the right accommodations with the right fit for that student. Another piece of research in 2003, it said it improved the content area of assessments. So if you were able to get the content, then you did better on the assessment. That makes perfect sense, right? Because now we can see the word, we can hear the word, we've got some background in this, and we're doing better. And the last one, it found that benefits were higher compared to silent reading. Some kids just need it read out loud, but how they get the content, some are more visual, some are more auditory. But I just kind of wanted you to have this because, again, when you go to your administration and you're talking about, I want to make this purchase of these things, they're going to say, prove it. Why? And that's why I always go back to the research. And we're going to have some great other data to prove it too. So in our example today, I'm just going to pick a fourth grader because sometimes it's easier for us to kind of go through this if we have a kid in mind. So pick a kid if you want, but I'm going to use a fourth grader. And I'm going to say that my kid is only decoding at the first grade level. Okay. But the student does receive special ed services, of course, because they have an IEP. And we are trying to do some reading remediation. So just because you are giving a student an accommodation doesn't mean that we stop the remediation, okay? So you always want to have those two kind of things in your head. Accommodations and remediations are going on at the same time. And again, think about if you never see a word and hear it, you may not have any idea what that word looks like. My good example is when I was working with students, I wrote the word tsunami on the chalk on the whiteboard, whatever, and they were like, "Well, that begins with a T, and you said sound," and I'm like, "Yep, I did. It's weird. English is weird. We got weird words." So having things so that multi-sensory, so we see it and we hear it, is awesome for our students because otherwise they can't participate, right? And again, we are really talking about those high incidence populations like our students with dyslexia and specific learning disabilities. But I'll touch on a few others. So what does this PAR thing look like and what is it going to do? So PAR to me always equals results. It's going to give me something in the end. So as an assistive technology specialist, I would go in and I'm going to try to figure out if the services and the devices I'm giving that student are correct. And how do I do that? So I want to answer these questions. What can the student decode and understand without tech at their reading level? So if they're a fourth grader, like I said in our case study, and the student is decoding at first grade, okay, there's a big gap there, right? So all the time they're sitting in science and social studies, they can't decode what's going on. So I need to give them tech to be able to decode that. But then it's like, what else is going on? Can that student understand when a human reads to them at grade level? If you've ever sat in a classroom when a paraprofessional is reading to them, again, like I said earlier, is it too fast? Is it too slow? Did they just breeze over a word? And is that student able to follow along? So you've got that going on. And if there's a bunch of people in the class, that student might not necessarily like an adult sitting next to them, especially in the upper grades. The other thing is, what can the student understand when the computer reads to them? Now, computer technology, we can all agree, at least I hope, has come a long way, right? The first voices that were out there were not very good. But they've come a long way. The new AI voices, in fact, I'm sure Dave, you'll touch on this, that Everway is coming out with some new AI voices, and they're incredible. It's hard to tell if it's a real voice or a computerized voice. So that's another part of this. And we also want to look at, when we're talking about this, was this passage that we're going to give the student a narrative or informative? Because there's different ways to learn from different pieces of text, okay? So we have to kind of look at that too. And we also, if you notice on the right-hand side, this is one of the forms that's in the PAR manual, and it talks about a Likert scale. Because what you really want to do too is get the students' take on whether or not they think that this is a better way for them to learn. Because you've got to get that buy-in from your student. If they're always fighting you, you're never going to get anywhere. You want the students' butt in the seat so that they can learn, right? If they're not there, they're not going to learn. So they've got to be able to have some stake in this too. All right, so those are the things we're going to look at. So this is what it looks like. So I said our student was a fourth grader. So you're going to pick out of that PAR manual, you're going to pick out a fourth grade passage because we said he was a fourth grader. And we're going to see how the student does with this, okay? We said that he's reading on their own at a first grade level. So actually, the first passage that they would get is a first grade passage. And you can and we want to see if the student can decode this on their own. Now, here's my caveat. When I've done this paper version wise, I have not done the first part of this protocol because it might immediately shut down your student. Because if you go in and you've got a kid who can't read in the first place, and you're going to give them a passage and you're saying, hey, read this, you can imagine what kids are going to do and what they're going to say, and you might lose them right then and there. And I don't want to lose them. I want them to be engaged in what I'm doing. So when you're doing this, you can kind of judge this a little bit and judge your student and decide too how long you're going to work on this. So the first one, if you're doing the paper version, you're supposed to have the student try to read on their own. So in this case, they tried to read a first grade passage. When they're finished with that, you're going to get a set of questions. So, and the questions might look like this. What's the main idea of the story? And you're going to use this little data thing and you're going to look if it's correct or incorrect. It's also going to look at, can the student pick out facts? Can they, how they're looking at vocabulary? And the other one is inferential data. Now, to do this by hand is really nice sometimes too, in that you can really drill down and get some of this information. Because I've really found in the past that students with autism, they do really well with finding things that are, as far as factual things, they're real good at that. But if they talked about everyone's wearing shorts, what time of the year do you think it is? Those inferential questions go zick right over it and they don't get it. But it's again a piece of data that we can use. Okay. So you want to kind of look at that piece too. So you're going to, these questions, by the way, you are going to read to them on the paper version so that the student, you're taking that barrier away because we already know the kid can't read, right? So you're taking that barrier away and you're going to go through these set of questions. Now, what we'll find in our case, we're going to say our fourth grader who can decode at first grade level. We gave them a story at the fourth grade level, and I read it to them, and we had another one that the computer read. So, and then we can kind of compare those results. Did they do better with a human read? Did they do better with a computer read? And with the computer read, it's going to actually read the text as it's going along. And because this is a paper version, you're going to have to create a PDF and have something that will read it to them. Okay, so you can get those results. Does that make sense to everybody? Anybody got any questions? Did I leave anything glaringly out, Dave?
No, no. The only thing that I would correct is since August of 23, the very first passage a student will see will be grade level using text to speech. They will see an independent reading passage, but the outcome that we're looking for is at least grade level comprehension. So, in an effort to try to make students go through the process faster, we actually ask that we start at grade level with a read aloud support first, and then we'll compare it to, once we determine what their comprehension level is when it's accommodated, then is that going to be higher than their independent at that point? So that is a slight change.
And see, that's about when I left the school district. That's
Yep.
when you guys made the change. Good to
Yep.
know. Thanks for letting me know that.
You bet.
So now we have this information that's in front of us. So we know whether or not the student can listen at grade level and then figure out the content. And now look at what this is going to give you. We can look and say, wow, this student really does do well in class. We know what the accommodation is. Our assistive technology that we have picked out is correct. We have data to support that. Does that make sense to everyone? So far, so good. Okay. So what this data is going to do now, it's going to point you towards things, okay? It's going to say how that student learns best. And that's really, we want to empower those kids, right? We want them to have this knowledge because so far when they've been in school, in our example is a fourth grader, but I've picked up kids as freshmen in high school and they're like, well, he can't read. And I'm like, whoa, where's this kid been? I should have had him years ago. But it is what it is and it happens, or they came from another district or whatever. So you want to be able to tell that student how they learn best because they're going to be coming in with that little piece of gnawing part in the back of their head that says, wait a minute, I can't read. I've been told I can't read. I've been told I'm dumb. I've been told all these things for years. You want that student to be able to see, remember that little Likert thing I told you about? You want them to understand you are smart. Because one of the things that we didn't, and Dave's going to talk more about this too, is so say, for example, our fourth grader did really well. He got above 80% of those questions at fourth grade. If I read it to him, he understood it all. Vocabulary's got there, he got the main idea, got the facts. Great. Maybe then I'm going to give him a fifth grade passage. And let's see how he does with fifth grade. And this is again the paper version. Dave's going to talk about the computerized version. So, and then you can say, wow, if I read it to you, so we remove that barrier of decoding, which we talked about right before this session started, that, excuse me, that if you look at the standards, only K through 2, that's where this is happening. We're talking about K through 2 as far as the standards for understanding and decoding. After that, it's no longer a standard, right? So, third, fourth, fifth grade, we're done teaching you how to read as far as the decoding. We're now trying to teach you how to get information out of that text, right? That's what we're looking at. So a student needs to know how to be able to do that. And by teaching them which is the way that they learn best, maybe they learn best by seeing it and hearing it, then we need to be able to use that way. It's also going to point you towards, because now you have a score, you know what's going on, if they need testing accommodations on the SAT or the ACT. And I've used this to make sure I've given them a PAR, a score, or a UPAR score. And I've used that to ask for accommodations in testing. Because I can say, without this, the student who has dyslexia, without a reading accommodation, they cannot decode on their own, but with it, they are at or above grade level. So a lot of times when you do that, then the SAT or ACT will say, okay, we can give you an accommodation to read. And I always want to kind of think about your students. If your student was blind, would you think twice about giving them the right accommodations? They can't see it. We wouldn't even think about that, right? We'd automatically be giving them accommodations. Why is it always different for students with learning disabilities? I don't know, something I always think about. Also, what it's going to point you towards, should you be using Bookshare or other accessible educational material? Remember, we go back to that question in the IEP. If you cannot understand the material, um, you can't decode on your own. How are you then able to get through it on your own and learn? You can't, because you just can't decode. So then, of course, we need to be providing them with Bookshare and other materials that are accessible to them. We're also looking at, again, reducing the student's cognitive load. If you don't, I always tell my students that you only have so much gas in the tank every day, right? You got 10 gallons, 10 gallons is it. If I got to empty 5 gallons out just to get through English class, I don't have anything left for math. And you got to read the math too. So if we can reduce that cognitive load and have the student be able to understand what's going on and be able to participate better, you're not going to have as many behaviors and you're going to have a happier student, okay? Because they're going to be more successful. And I've got something called the student factor on here. And to me, that's that when I'm finished with doing PAR or UPAR, and I can give that student a score and say, look, you're a fourth grader, all right? It's hard for you to read. You can only read stuff that's usually at first grade. But if the computer reads it to you, and we're going to use it for our example, you can understand things that are at the sixth grade, 2 grade levels ahead of where you are. That takes a student who's all slumped down and not wanting to do anything to sitting up straight and going, really? Really, really? I'm smart? And I'm like, yeah. It's that student factor. When those kids want to take that home and put it on the refrigerator, because they never get to put anything on the refrigerator because it's so hard, I've now given them away. That's what assistive technology is, my friends. It is that tool that can help that student go, okay, I can get through this and I'm going to be a successful person. That's that student factor. And Dave, you're going to talk about academic success.
Yeah. Well, I think again, what I love in my 25 years, like PAR and UPAR are my absolute favorite tool because while they will absolutely point at appropriate accommodations specifically for our students with disabilities, to me, the most important thing is it tells us which students can be successful accessing and having success with grade level content. And that is the learning outcome of every student, not just our students with disabilities, not our general education students, but we want every student to be able to comprehend grade level content. We always assess to identify the students who cannot meet that learning expectation, but now adding UPAR or PAR allows us to determine which of those students who can't do it independently could do it with a read aloud support.
Absolutely.
And this
Research, Dave?
research, yeah, this research actually, this is a slide that Dr. DeCoste shares all the time because so often I hear from educators that, well, we can't use this as a read aloud accommodation on the state assessment. So why are we doing this in the classroom Monday through Friday? And the reason is that research tells us that students who are using text readers, which is what UPAR is going to point the need to, become better independent readers, even when they're not using their assistive technology. And that only makes sense because I hear the word, I see the word, I am much more likely to be able to decode that word independently, even when I don't have access. So often I hear this, that text to speech is cheating. It provides an unfair advantage, or we can't use it as an accommodation on state assessment. And here are just four of many research studies that says what's important is we're making kids better independent readers. That's what's important.
I always tell people when they say, well, we've got a paraprofessional that'll read to them. And I'm like, is that paraprofessional going to go to work with them and going to go to college with them and going to do all those other things? And everybody
Right.
looks at me like, well, gosh, no.
Right. Well, and they're
But
going to need, even when they enter the workforce, your disability doesn't leave you when you walk across the stage. You're going to have
nope.
that when you go to college. You walk across the stage at college, you still have that disability when you go to your workplace as well. So, we need a solution from, K to gray, we talk about here at Everway.
Yeah, so we want, I mean, really think about it. What do we want for our students? We want them to be successful adults, right? How do we do that? And assistive technology is one of those ways that we do that.